Hello everyone, in this video, we'll go through the key features released in CAPC 0.5 release. Apart from the various bug fixes and enhancements, this release had three key features: CAPC as unmanaged CKS cluster, project support, and enable CAPC for regular users. We'll go through these features one by one. For this feature, I will be following the documentation. I've already set up the required tools mentioned here. You also need to set up a CAPI compatible template in your CloudStack environment. You can find the pre-built images here. For this demo, I will be using this image here, which is for Kubernetes 1.27.2 and Ubuntu 20.04. I've already set up this template here, which you can see is in ready state. I've already created a client cluster. Next step is to create the Kubernetes secret, which will be used by CAPC controller to communicate with the CloudStack environment. For this, we need the API key and secret key, which can be found under the profile, the user. I've already prepared this manifest for our environment here. Now let's apply this manifest in our Kubernetes environment. I've also already initialized the management cluster, since this step can take a long time. One thing to note here is that we need to ensure that the CAPC CloudStack machine CKS sync is set to true. This will ensure that the CAPC clusters are synced with your CloudStack environment. You can also, if it's not enabled for your cluster, you can enable it manually. You can check if it's enabled by describing the deployment of the CAPC controller and see if this argument is set to true. You can set this argument to true if it's not set to enable syncing of the clusters. Next, we need to prepare an environment configuration file, which we'll be using to generate the CAPC cluster spec. One thing to note here is that we need to set this to true to enable syncing of the CAPC cluster with CloudStack CKS. I've already prepared this environment configuration file for this demo. Now let's source this file to set the environment variables. And next step is to generate the CAPC cluster configuration file. We need to update the Kubernetes version, since we are using version 1.27.2 for this demo. Now CAPC cluster spec has been generated. As you can see, the CloudStack cluster has this sync with ACS set to true. This enables the syncing of this particular CAPC cluster with CloudStack CKS. You can also set sync with ACS to true for your existing CAPC cluster to enable the syncing of that cluster with CloudStack CKS. Now let's apply this manifest. Now let's describe the newly created CAPC cluster. As you can see, the CAPC cluster is being deployed. Now let's wait for a couple of minutes for the CAPC cluster to become ready. The CAPC cluster is now in ready state. Now let's check the status in the UI. Let's see the instances that were created. It created two instances. One is the worker node and the other is the control plane. Enabling the sync creates a CKS cluster here, which is of type external managed. It gives you a view of the CAPC cluster and its associated resources on CloudStack. You can take the related instances CAPC instances created by CAPC here. In case you want this one, you want to delete this CAPC cluster and you have lost access to the CAP management cluster, you can delete the Kubernetes cluster here. You can set cleanup and exploit to true if you want to delete the associated resources with this CAPC cluster. For the demo, I have created a project called CAPC project. Now, to create a CAPC cluster within a project, the steps are same as before. The only difference is that you need to specify the project name like this under the CloudStack cluster spec. Now let's apply this manifest to create the CAPC cluster and describe the cluster status. This will take a couple of minutes for the resources to get created. In the meantime, let's check what's happening on the CloudStack UI. As you can see, there are no networks or anything by default. We need to toggle this project to see the resources associated with projects here. Or we can go select the project here and view only the CAPC project resources. As you can see, the resources are getting created under the CAPC project here. Similarly, the instances are also getting created under the CAPC project. To create a CAPC cluster for a regular user, you just need to create the cluster using the regular user credential. For this demo, I have already created a user named user and used this user's API key and secret key in the cloud config file. Now let's apply this manifest on a Kubernetes cluster. Next, let's apply the manifest to create the CAPC cluster. Now let's wait for the CAPC controller to create the resources for this cluster. As you can see, the CAPC cluster is now in ready state. Now let's check the resources created in the CloudStack UI. As you can see, the network is created under the account ACS user, and so are the instances associated with this CAPC cluster. This concludes the key features of the CAPC 0.5 release. For more details, please refer to the release notes. Thank you for watching.